From the Talisman by William Somerville, written 1740. Swift as the shooting star that gilds the night, with rapid transient blaze, she runs, she flies. Sudden she stops, nor longer can endure the painful course, but drooping sinks away. And like that falling meteor, there she lies, a jelly, cold on earth.
You are listening to Counter Esperanto podcast, tangents about Twin Peaks with Carl Eckler and Jubal Brousseau from the Pseudo Spaces Network. Welcome everybody to this week's episode of Counter Esperanto. I'm Jubal Brousseau and I'm with my co-host
Carl Eckler.
First off, we should discuss the format that we've settled on. Last week was our first episode, and we got some great feedback. We're definitely encouraged. Any of our first episode jitters have long passed, and we wanted to kind of talk about our format. Usually, what we're doing is we're technically kind of like going bi-weekly on our major episodes. The ones that we put a lot of work and thought in, I guess. But the episodes in between,
we're just going to crap on and throw them out there.
Yeah. Well, not quite. No, actually, Carl did a lot of work on his segment here, but this is actually a way to stay active every week, but also have probably just maybe fewer segments. If there's any Twin Peaks news, we're getting down to the wire here where there's going to be trailers and stuff coming out. And in fact, there's a case in point. I just saw that Showtime has their Twin Peaks merchandise store open, and there's a 20% off coupon on the Welcome to Twin Peaks website. So if you use that promo code, you can get 20% off your order. And I picked up one of those coffee cups that David Lynch designed for Twin Peaks. So it's the first official merchandise.
Nice.
It's being released. Yeah. And it's, David Lynch's work is a lot of things, but it could, most people wouldn't call it cute, but this coffee cup's cute. You should check it out.
I'll do so. I'm also turning green with jealousy, the very same colors as the Royal typewriter I'm currently staring into.
You're staring into a typewriter while talking into a computer.
Yes, I am delightfully retro-technological.
I'm glad you got that phrase out in one try. Anyway, so we wanted to discuss some interesting pieces that Carl came across as we were, kind of trolling through the internet and various weirdness sites, and we found some interesting stuff. Let's set it up. What did we find, Carl?
Well, this is a segment that I like to call I Will Tell You Two Things, wherein I'll tell you two things.
We'll just go ahead and let that roll, and then we'll meet you all at the end of it.
Counter Esperanto podcast segment. Strange Things in the Woods with Slime. I will tell you two things. One of fact, one of fiction. Both are real. Twin Peaks asks us to believe in a number of impossible and contradictory things. Indeed, part of the magic of the show is that this does nothing to debase the impact of the things in question. For a show that revolves around mysteries and secrets, Twin Peaks is not concerned over much about truth and falsity, or even reality and fantasy. This is not unlike the world that we spend most of our waking lives experiencing. It is universally accepted by physicists that Schrodinger's cat is both alive and dead while in the box. Just as corporate lawyers accede that the legal fictions known as limited liability corporations are persons in the sight of the law. And just about all of us agree that little scraps of paper with fancy printing on them are worth spending most of our time pursuing. The above examples mix quantum theory with magical thinking and consensual hallucination. Their banality, however, cloaks their more mysterious and esoteric qualities and connotations. The two things I am about to tell, if nothing else, retain a veil of the obscure and the unknown. A strange creature stalks the verdant green shadows of Washington's Olympic National Forest. Strange to the point of unbelievability, and so skittish and retiring that modern science doubts that any examples of its species still walk amongst the moss-shrouded boughs. No, not the hairy one that has a conspicuous amount of basic cable television shows devoted to hunting or uncovering or otherwise discovering it. Instead, it is the sole remaining arboreal cephalopod in North America, Octopus paxarbolus, better known as the Pacific Northwest tree octopus. Between the moistness of the environment, specialized skin adaptations, and frequent access to standing pools of water, or the Salish Sea itself, this amazing creature is able to survive in environments that other members of her genus can only visit for short periods of time before succumbing to dehydration. As a predator species, she depends on the adaptive camouflage supplied by a system of chromatophore cells common to cuttlefish and other octopi. Sporting one of the largest brain-to-body ratios of any invertebrate, she is known to be a very effective ambush hunter of small prey such as large insects and small animals, like frogs or rodents. Their innate curiosity serves them very well in their role as scavengers. Because of this, there are widely reported tales of the creatures manipulating jars, watches, tools, and even telephones as dexterously as they would a stolen bird's egg. Lacking a structured lung, she is herself completely silent, but remains highly sensitive to vibration, just as pelagic octopi are. The tree octopus also retains the habit of her ocean-going kin of communicating with other individuals by changing the color of her skin. Red, for example, indicates anger, white fear, and a black color with mottled patterns visible only in the ultraviolet carries complicated information related to matings, a task for which the tree octopus returns to the waters of the Hood Canal region to spawn in the typical manner of her species. While a previously known nuisance to logging operations, but never a direct danger as the typical paxarbolus measures only 10 to 12 inches when fully grown, and lacks the poison glands of some other species such as H. lunulata. The primary threat facing this rare and interesting creature is the destruction of its habitat by civilization encroaching on the ancient old-growth forests that form its sole landward habitat. Because of its intensely shy nature, even the presence of a small family home will cause the tree octopus to move its territory up to a mile further into the deep forest. And this disruption and the inevitable conflict with other small predators or members of Paxarbolus is easily catastrophic enough to result in death for the affected individual. Additional information on how you can help keep the Pacific Northwest tree octopus alive and thriving in our forests is available from zapatopi.net. That's zapatopi.net. The second thing I have to tell is about a mysterious substance, possibly extraterrestrial in origin, that rains down on the woods and small towns of Washington, among other places. What exactly it is, and where it comes from, still baffles scientists today. But ancient chroniclers, and yours truly, refer to it simply as star jelly. Since one can begin to measure a circle starting anywhere, we will begin in 1994, when a large rain of star jelly fell on the town of Oakville, Washington. In form, it was described as a greenish-white gel, foul-smelling and quickly evaporating. It was also utterly resistant to explanation or analysis. Nor was this an isolated incident. It happened again in 1997 in Everett, Washington, and in a number of other times and places since it was first recorded in the Middle Ages. Those chroniclers gave us the name star jelly from the theory they attached to its origin. They held that heavenly bodies must excrete and expectorate in a similar manner to those of us upon the earth, and that shooting stars were the visible sign of said ejecta. Star jelly itself was the remains of said operations, once they reached solid ground. While somewhat superseded today by our greater understanding of astronomy, it was a fact commonly accepted and known by the learned of the time, and of later eras it would become the focus of poetry and prose. Sir John Suckling wrote, "As he whose quicker eye doth trace a false star shot to a marked place, does run apace, and thinking it to catch, a jelly up to snatch," in the year 1641. Later, John Dryden noted that, "When I had taken up what I supposed a fallen star, I found I had been cozened with a jelly," in 1679. Star jelly first stuck to the pages of the weird in H.P. Lovecraft's 1927 short story, The Color Out of Space, wherein an unidentifiable substance oozed forth from a meteorite which, while it quickly evaporated, even from hermetically sealed sample jars, had a very deleterious effect on a remote farm and the family who tended it. One of those effects being an opening of the mind to influence by places and entities beyond the people and spaces of our familiar, known world. While the 1947 Maury Island incident, which opened both the modern era of the UFO phenomena and Mark Frost's investigation of it in The Secret History, could be understood as a fall of star jelly, a more interesting report came in 1950. 4 police officers responding to a UFO report encountered a domed disc of quivering jelly that later dissolved quickly into an odorless, sticky scum some 6 feet across. This incident later formed the basis for the 1958 film The Blob. While in history it was a widely known and accepted fact that star jelly was formed from the excreta of astronomical objects, modern sensibilities tend to reject this explanation in favor of theories that stick closer to the ground. The microbiologist brought in by Unsolved Mysteries to test the 1994 Oakville substance concluded that star jelly was, quote, a matrix containing Pseudomonas fluorescens and Enterobacter cloacae, unquote. These are 2 fairly common bacteria, and the microbiologist stuck to this theory even when the sample, like those in Lovecraft's story, mysteriously disappeared while out of sight. The social media revolution, on the other hand, tends to view the loss of evidence in this manner: evidence itself. Evidence of a conspiracy of public-private interests seeding unknown but harmful substances through our skies in the form of chemtrails. Hidden in the exhaust contrails of military and passenger jet planes, these chemical or biological agents are intended to accomplish any number of goals, from population reduction to mind control, and have been blamed for a large number of increasing social ills, from cancer to autism. And in such a scenario, it would be difficult to refute the theory that the active ingredient of chemtrails can, under the right atmospheric conditions, condense into the thick, goo-like matter we call star jelly. Establishment scientists, of course, reject this for arguably more sane explanations, such as star jelly being the remnants of frog spawn, regurgitated by suddenly queasy magpies, or the swamp gas of star jelly, pools of slime mold. Pools. Personally, the idea of a magpie or a frog spawn large enough to be responsible for a 6-foot pool of star jelly gives me the shivers, but giant birds are another episode. What, then, are we to make of these 2 examples of mingled fact and fantasy, of all kinds of questionable statuses, resistant to explanation and disambiguation, other than their linkage to the psychogeography of the Pacific Northwest, a subject near to our hearts and addresses? Star jelly holds a marked similarity to a certain pool of burnt engine oil surrounded by a ring of sycamore trees. A dark mirror filled with oneiromantic, psychopompic, and possibly entheogenic properties, while our local tree octopus specializes in appearing as anything but itself. It literally, like the ghostwood owls, is not what it seems. On a deeper level, they both display mixed amounts and forms of secrecy and mystery. Like the woods that surround and permeate Twin Peaks, these two things are both potentially harmful, playful, or simply as inscrutable as nature itself. Like Leland Palmer's guilt or innocence, they both demand that we make our own judgments about them. Like the Red Room, they both beckon us to a world outside our mundane and rational outlook. And like a number of characters in our favorite show, they are both rather slimy. What, if any, meaning these two examples of the extra-mundane holds, we will leave for your own capable and incisive judgment, just as we leave the question of their origins, existence, or objective reality for you to grapple with. For some, the conundrum is too deep to be bridged with a simple answer. For others, those who value mystery over secrecy, we would not dream of denying you the contemplation of such a puzzle.
Well, that was fascinating, Carl. Where did you find that information?
Wikipedia mostly. Yeah, I actually had run across our cephalopod friend before. It's actually an object lesson in one of my librarianship classes. For star jelly, I was looking up something else, and I ended up on a Wikipedia disambiguation page, and I saw something on it called star jelly. The thing that I found interesting about those two things was that they have a kind of a, well, Alan Moore would say they retain a whiff of the alembic, which means that they've got a little bit of magic stuck to them. They're known entities, but at the very same time, they're the sorts of things that would give librarians fits because you don't know exactly where to put it. Because nobody knows what star jelly is exactly, or if it's even something that counts as a category anymore, because it could be an outdated term for a number of different things.
Yeah, this is something that's not really found anymore, right? It's like spontaneous combustion. It's just...
Well, that still does happen, at least according to reports.
Okay.
Much like star jelly, we had a report of it less than 10 years ago. But the one that we concentrated on was the one that occurred in 1994, and then again in 1997 on the Pacific coast of Washington State.
It's interesting because, it's when you first told me about this, one of the things that popped into my head was the Glastonbury oil that apparently acts as a conduit between the two worlds in Twin Peaks. It's like this idea of a transcendental substance.
Until you said it, I had no connection with anything Twin Peaksy other than the fact that it was weird and happened in the Northwest.
Mm-hmm.
But once you mentioned it, I took notice of the oil a lot more than I did before. Before I thought it was more of a smell indicator that because people will go back and forth across a soft spot or bridge between dimensions next to this pool of oil, they retain a whiff of the smell of burnt engine oil.
Yes, and it's tied up into when Cooper's in the Black Lodge or the waiting room at the end of the last episode. His cup of coffee transmogrifies between a liquid, a solid, and a viscous substance, probably the oil.
Yeah, you're right. I mentioned in the piece that star jelly holds a marked similarity to a certain pool of burnt engine oil surrounded by a ring of sycamore trees. A dark mirror filled with oneiromantic, psychopompic, and possibly entheogenic properties. When I wrote that, what I realized the engine oil was to me, I took it as being a showstone, or maybe it's shoestone because it's spelled S-H-E-W. But a shoe stone was something that probably was most famously used by Dr. John Dee. He didn't use it himself. He employed a seer to look into the show stone and tell him what the angels wanted to tell Dr. Dee. And this guy, of course, was a very gifted psychic and medium, and not entirely a con artist at all, even though he had a conviction for forgery. His name was Edward Kelly. I do know that Dee and Kelly are revered as early modern masters of the occult when it comes to folks like the Esoteric Order of the Golden Dawn, Aleister Crowley, and Jack Parsons. Talking about Jack Parsons, that's talking about the beginning of America's space program. I mean, that's
Yes.
the man who invented the solid rocket fuel that propelled the space shuttle into orbit.
You mean it's kind of a space jelly?
It's more like a paste. I think the TSA would call it a paste, so you couldn't bring it on board an airplane. You could use it as a jet-assisted takeoff unit for an airplane, though, which is what his company, Aerojet, actually managed to make all their money off of, building JTOWs to throw B-25s off of carriers during World War II. And then he spent all that money on sex orgies and blowing shit up in the Sonora Desert.
Yeah, it's I guess one could say he was his inner child was very active.
I'm certain there were other forms of star jelly involved in those practices as well.
Oh. So why the octopus?
Why the octopus? It's kind of uncanny. It is literally a fish out of water. It's got an odd number of appendages.
And they can all be manipulated independently, which is kind of mind-boggling to think of. That each of the octopus's 8 legs can be.
Yeah, they're each almost a separate suborganism. Their brains are extremely complex and yet distributed. A lot of their neural capacity is actually in the limbs. The way that their minds must work must be just completely alien to our frame of reference. And that's what made me think of Twin Peaks. I mean, a lot of things in Twin Peaks are like an octopus. A fish out of water, sometimes in a percolator, and sometimes just something completely and totally bizarre, like a psychologist fondling the hula girl on his tie while
Yeah.
while walking around with red and blue glasses and corks in his ears.
He was never weirder than he was in that first moment. And I just, the one thing that always gets me about that first appearance of Dr. Jacoby is he is completely out of it. And Cooper just kind of says, he's a psychologist, or a psychiatrist or something. And it's just, and he says, she was seeing me without her parents knowing about, and it's just like, dude.
Well, that's illegal.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, but yeah, that's just a genius piece of acting right there. Is when he's just has his finger up under the hula skirt on his tie. I mean, yeah, that's why I said in the last episode that one of the surprising things about the book to me was how
involved, and even though a lot of the times what we're reading is his book on entheogens, and I think the big chunk of that book is him describing his ayahuasca trip.
Yeah.
Oh, and another thing that just clicked was when we first see him, he's got earplugs in. So he's artificially deaf, and so he's speaking louder. And so he's almost channeling Gordon Cole at that point.
That also makes me think of, since we now know that the glasses are intended to sort of suppress certain aspects of the brain, the logic and intuition centers. So one could say that he was plugging his hearing in order to make his sight more acute. He was messing with his sort of like his sensory inputs.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of what Dr. Jacoby's interested in is artificially changing his state of awareness, either through drugs or through altering his perception by using special lenses, or making one sense more acute by deafening another. He's really into that, and to me, that seems to connect directly with the poem. The magician longs to see.
Yes.
I think the main point of his character is that I think he really wants to be a shaman. I believe he says something about psychologists being like the modern shamans,
Yeah.
although I could be wrong. Um, Please write in and tell me which episode I'm misremembering incorrectly.
You mentioned ayahuasca, and it's interesting because Jacoby, Russ Tamblin's co-star, not only in Twin Peaks but West Side Story, Richard Bamer, has a segment on the Twin Peaks collection. There's an interview with him talking about being on an ayahuasca trip, and that was a really fascinating conversation. There's a whole segment in the in the special features that are where you basically get to spend 5 or 10 minutes with a lot of the stars, and just kind of in their homes or having kind of like an intimate conversation, and that's some of my favorite special features. But definitely Richard Bamer's conversation or his story about doing this psychoactive substance is really pretty interesting.
Yeah, I haven't seen that yet, and I am looking forward to it because that would be intensely interesting.
And one other thing about cephalopods is their connection to weird fiction. I mean, they're sort of like this iconic symbol for Lovecraftian horror, because Lovecraft had the willies when it came to a lot of sea life, and especially anything with a tentacle. And so the tentacle is sort of like this icon of weird fiction. And I just wanted to take this moment to sort of express that our next full episode is going to be about weird fiction. What I've titled it, What We Talk About When We Talk About Weird. Because when we talk about weird, it actually has a kind of a specific...
It's a specific, well-defined non-definition.
Yes. And we'll get into that in the next episode, because we're going to be talking more and more about how Twin Peaks quite possibly is the greatest work of weird fiction on television. And there's been a lot of shows that handle the weird. I mean, there are a lot of individual episodes of The Twilight Zone that are absolutely perfect examples of weird fiction. But Twin Peaks and weird fiction will be the subject of the next episode. So definitely check that out, because it's going to be a doozy.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to hearing it. I mean, recording it.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting to be in this situation. We've been really heartened by the feedback that we've been getting from the community. Because we're really doing this as much for, the community building as just our building excitement for the revival.
Well, we're certainly not doing it for the money or the sex.
And so we'll be hopefully keeping it regular in the months to come. This format where we're basically going to be having these conversations, but we're also recording segments, will make it so that we can basically just work on stuff as we have time, so that it's not one big chunk and that needs to be edited all at once.
Because if one actually goes that direction, then one is very much tempted to end up like God. If one
staring in helpless horror at your creation.
I thought we weren't going to talk about the election, Joe. What really interests me about Star Jelly, and it's just now after reading this a undisclosed number of times for the pre-recording, is that Star Jelly, officially at least, comes from nowhere. That is either the gulfs of deep space or some mechanism in the atmosphere, or perhaps the oceans that we know nothing about. It rains down, and then, in the case of Twin Peaks, the jelly, or the mysterious substance, becomes burnt engine oil. And that pool is in the middle of Glastonbury Grove. From the map and from the show, we can tell that's a long ways from anywhere. And it's just out in the middle of the woods someplace, this big pool of burnt engine oil that is so far off the beaten track that Cooper and Sheriff Truman and Wyndham Earle have to hike at least a distance in order to get to it. So where did it come from? That's my connection to something that falls from the sky, a star jelly, which is an almost Fortean phenomena. I mean, Charles Fort, the thing that got him interested in the odd things that he found in old newspaper clippings that eventually took his name, Fort being Fortean, was strange falls where fish or periwinkles or dust or jelly.
Or Skittles.
What was that a thing that Fort reported on? Was he tasting the rainbow at that point? We're back to drugs, aren't we?
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was always wondering where the heck that burnt engine oil came from. What vehicle could it have come from? So all I can think of is that it fell there. It either fell there from a vehicle. Let's not call them saucers. They don't like being called saucers. The ones that Kenneth Arnold saw weren't saucers. They were actually triangular, and they moved like saucers skipping over a calm pond.
So it was really more about their drift, like that they had a smooth, like they're being thrown like a frisbee, as you know. So yeah, so wasn't a reference to their shape.
Yeah, they moved in a series of parabolas, like skipping a stone off of a pond. And our great American news media, the hounds for accuracy that they are, transformed those into flying saucers. But anyway, like in Moria Island, either the jelly or the burnt engine oil fell there out of a vehicle, or it just rained there naturally, either a few years ago, or a few hundred years ago, or a few million years ago. And from that, we get a substance that offers a view into the other side of reality, and it can do that because it has the quality of being from another place. Because it's from that other place, you can use it to see or to open a pathway to maybe the place it came from, maybe the place it was going to. We don't know. It's too mysterious.
And that's one of the things that I find fascinating about the pool of oil. And it might have been just something that, that Lynch wanted it to have the contrast, but it's sitting in a basin of white stones.
Mm-hmm.
Which calls to mind the chevron floor pattern, the black and white lodge, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's a good call.
The interesting thing about it is that it obviously isn't burnt engine oil. It's something that calls to mind burnt engine oil. That's what it smells like, to people.
Yeah.
And
I don't think anybody ever said that it was burnt engine oil. I think
in the last episode, I think the log lady shows up with it, and Coop smells it and says burnt engine oil. But it's what it calls to mind. That doesn't mean that's what it is.
Yes, exactly.
And speaking of which, you and I had a conversation on the phone last night, and I kind of wanted to get this out because I don't know where else it would fit. But we were talking about Let's Rock.
Oh, let's rock.
That was good. Let's rock. Anyway, Cooper goes to the Fat Trout Trailer Park to investigate the disappearance of Chet Desmond. Oh, look at me remembering names. He sees the car, and on the windshield is written in cursive, almost like the same scroll as Slow Bar, that neon sign, says "Let's rock," and we see it backwards from inside the vehicle. Now, what's interesting is that he's looking at this, and you get this sense that he's having a moment of deja vu, because otherwise, why would that necessarily call his attention to it any other, yes, it's a car in a trailer park with graffiti on it, so, and I remember, I don't know if I read a review or something about it where it talked about that this was some sort of heavy-handed callback on David Lynch's part. But absolutely, I don't see it as that. What I see it as, when, chronologically later, when Cooper has that dream about the man from another place, and the first thing he says is "Let's rock." He claps his hands and says "Let's rock."
You put it beautifully last night when you said it was like ripples going forward and backward in time, because the Red Room is atemporal. It exists outside of time. Bits and pieces from Cooper's subconscious are being projected forward and backward in time through his memories.
Yes, you put how I put it very beautifully. But anyway, I wanted to get that out because when we think about the lodge and we think about it's outside of time.
The Let's Rock is a written dust is just a mind-bogglingly clever way of showing how that place that looks on upon the rest of the world as a flat circle actually operates.
Yeah, and what this is showing is that the man from another place, when he says these supposedly random statements, it shows that they are pulling details out of the minds of the people they encounter. And that's why you have all these incongruous people, the giant, the old man, the man from another place, and then you have the Chalfont/Tremons.
The Hopping Man and all the other weird lodge inhabitants. And I want to say that they pick out those details because they're weird, not because they want to be weird on purpose, but because things that are out of the ordinary impress more deeply on our memories. And
yes,
so that would stick up higher when they're sorting through memories of a person that encounters them. Those are the ones that are easiest to pick out, the ones that are the most bizarre.
When the man from another place calls it a waiting room, you get the sense that it is, when they say between two worlds, it doesn't even necessarily mean between our world and theirs. It could also mean between the White and Black Lodge.
What the Red Room is to me is it's the center part of a seesaw. It's the single point of balance and stasis in an otherwise churning chaos of a universe. I think that's expressed admirably in Frost's book, where even as far back as Lewis and Clark, Meriwether Lewis reports images of classical statuary in his experience. So those pieces apparently have been there for a while, maybe forever. Maybe Lewis actually sat in the same chair that Dale Cooper did.
Exactly. It exists completely outside of time.
Mm-hmm.
There's also this thing that's interesting about David Lynch having he has this sort of thing about literal stages. In most of his film, there's some sort of a performance on a stage. But this idea of a curtain.
Yeah.
That it is a divide, it is a veil that hides something that you wouldn't normally be able to see.
The importance of a curtain, the subconscious resonance of curtain imagery is that when a curtain is down, it is hiding a scene from view in the theater. And when the curtain comes up, the play can begin, and the audience is instantly transported into that world of the set design, playwright, and the actors. When the curtain functions like it does in Twin Peaks when one enters the Red Room, the curtain is down, but drawn back, so that one person may leave one scenario and enter into another. Well, this episode turned out to be more robust than we expected it would be, but then we should have expected that it would have been, because one thing Jubal and I are really good at, it's going on and on forever about Twin Peaks and weird fiction.
So I'll finish up with a little bit of housekeeping, and we're going to leave off with a poem. It's actually the first two sonnets of H.P. Lovecraft's Fungi from Yuggoth. Carl will give a little bit of spiel about how it's significant after I do our contact information and all that fun stuff. You can follow us on Twitter at C_Esperanto, ESPERANTO. You can email us at counteresperanto@pseudospaces. That's PSEUDOSPAC.ES. And if you're so inclined, leave a starred review on iTunes. We'd love to hear feedback from everyone that is enjoying or has some sort of comment to contribute.
And if you're so inclined, you can write to us using United States Postal Mail at P.O. Box 13313, Spokane Valley, Washington 99213-3313. That's right. We're the address with all the threes in it.
So, Carl, Fungi from Yuggoth, give us some background.
Fungi from Yuggoth is a sonnet cycle. It's a sequence of 36 sonnets composed, according to Wikipedia, it was written between 27 September 1929 through 4 January 1930. That makes sense because H.P. Lovecraft had a tendency to write a good deal of poetry over the holidays. In fact, one of the things he's famous for is writing jaunty Christmas poems to his friends. He wrote numbers of them, but we've got 6 or 7 that still survive. And for a wonderful reading of them, I would recommend you check out the H.P. Podcraft podcast with Chris Lackey and
Chad Pfeiffer?
Chad Pfeiffer. They have a friend of theirs, Andrew Lehman, give a wonderful reading of some of H.P. Lovecraft's best Christmas poems.
There is no better audiobook reader than Andrew Lehman working today. His reading of The Call of Cthulhu and the Haunter in the Dark.
Haunter of the Dark.
Oh my! I think they're free on the website, but if they're not, there might be a few dollars, and it's absolutely worth it.
They are still available for free, although Chris and Chad would really appreciate you going over to Witch House Media and subscribing to their still running podcast. But yeah, the original readings that Lehman read, they are still up there for free from the hppodcraft.com website, and I really recommend you checking them out because since Christopher Lee died, there is no better spoken word audio artist than Andrew Lehman. I totally agree with you there. The importance of these 36 sonnets is mostly that H.P. Lovecraft wrote them, and that they're brilliant. Earlier in his career, Lovecraft really wanted to be a poet, and he tried a lot, and was actually a very, very good poet for a 10-year-old when he was 10. He simply, for some reason, never really progressed beyond the amateur poet that would be able to come up with a nice bit of poetry for occasions. He, I'm certain, could manage to be a wonderful Toastmaster, but, well, I think he himself would probably agree that he was no Clark Ashton Smith. The Fungi from Yuggoth is where that changed, and where his voice as an actual weird poet actually came to the full. And it's a tragedy that The Fungi from Yuggoth is really his only work of poetry that could be classified on the same level as his prose that survives to this day. Maybe we would have had more if stomach cancer and too many cans of bad beans didn't do him in 37, but we'll never know.
Yeah. So on that note, we'll leave you with my serviceable reading of the first 2 sonnets of H.P. Lovecraft's Fungi from Yuggoth. Thank you, everybody, and take care. Fungi from Yuggoth by H.P. Lovecraft. 1. The Book. The place was dark and dusty and half lost, in tangles of old alleys near the quays, reeking of strange things brought in from the seas, and with queer curls of fog that west winds tossed. Small lozenge panes obscured by smoke and frost just showed the books in piles like twisted trees, rotting from floor to roof, congeries of crumbling elder lore at little cost. I entered charmed, and from a cobwebbed heap took up the nearest tome and thumbed it through, trembling at curious words that seemed to keep some secret, monstrous if one only knew. Then, looking for some cellar old and craft, I could find nothing but a voice that laughed. Two. Pursuit. I held the book beneath my coat, at pains to hide the thing from sight in such a place, hurrying through the ancient arbor lanes, with often turning head and nervous pace. Dull, furtive windows, in old tottering brick, peered at me oddly as I hastened by, and thinking what they sheltered, I grew sick, for a redeeming glimpse of clean blue sky. No one had seen me take the thing, but still, a blank laugh echoed in my whirling head, and I could guess what nighted worlds of ill lurked in that volume I had coveted. The way grew strange, the walls alike and matting, and far behind me unseen feet were padding.